Lucis Trust, a non-profit, non-political, and non-sectarian organization on the roster of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, and concerned with the establishment of world cooperation and goodwill, presents Inner Sight with your host, Robert Anderson. He, with Sarah and Dale McKechnie, President and Vice President of Lucis Trust, will discuss philosophical and spiritual topics essential to everyday life. Now here's your host, Robert Anderson.
Welcome. Inner sight is simply seeing that which is always present, but not yet fully recognized. You have, within you, the ability to see yourself and the world around you in a new way with new eyes. So, stay with us, and together we'll look at the world and ourselves with inner sight. Our topic for today, responsibility and expression of the soul, part 1. Before we explore this topic, I'd like to say a few words about Alice Bailey. Alice Bailey is the founder of the Lucis Trust, and the Lucis Trust sponsors this show. Alice Bailey also wrote 24 books of esoteric philosophy, and those 24 books are the main inspiration for the dialogue that you hear on this show. Following thought is also from the works of Alice Bailey. The sense of responsibility is one of the first indications that the soul of the individual is awakened. Do you think there is a growing sense of responsibility today, and what might be some of the signs of it?
I think that's a question that would probably be answered in polar opposite ways by different people. On the one hand, I think some would say the sense of responsibility is not quite so strong today because people are so self-focused in their orientation, their aspirations for life, especially in a culture like ours where there's such a strong emphasis on the individual's self-fulfillment and so on. But another way of thinking about that question might bring up a yes. There is more responsibility when you look at the growth of volunteer work, more emphasis on being a good parent, community service, and so on. What do you think?
Well, yes, and the expanse of philanthropy is also a good indication, because there's a sense there of spreading one's money around to where it is needed most, and contributing in that way, and I think that's a good sense of responsibility. Also, the concern nowadays for the environment is waking up a lot of people, and they're responding to the real needs of our environment, to keep the environment clean. And so I think people are responding. In a sense, responsibility is just that. It's the ability to respond to a need or some outside influence, or actually an influence that comes from the soul, is also the ability to respond.
There's another situation going on in this country at the present time, and that's the democratic process. We're engaged, immersed, we might say, overwhelmed by the primary elections that have been going on for what seems like most of my lifetime, but I guess it's only a few months. More than a year, really, since the campaigning started. And it's interesting to see that more and more people are paying attention, trying to follow the issues, turning out to vote in the primary elections in unusually high numbers. People might not think of responsibility in the spiritual sense as related to the democratic process, but in fact, when you think about it, democracy requires a great deal of responsibility if it's going to work. If people don't pay attention, don't follow the issues, don't use their best judgment to choose the candidate that would be the wisest leader, we end up with a system of government that doesn't work well. And even though we've had experience with failed governments over and over again, so many people still want to be allowed a dispensation from participating in the process. This year it seems people are paying more attention, and I think that's a sign that people are realizing that to be a citizen in a democratic nation means you have not only rights but responsibilities.
Absolutely, and it's that sense of responsibility that, we perhaps need a change of government. We're going to get a change of government, and so more and more people are beginning to wake up and take part become part of the solution and not just part of the problem. And that's very important as far as awakening this soul capacity for responsibility, because it forces oneself to look outside and beyond your own little sphere, your own little world, your own little concern for yourself and your family and your own particular needs, and to see yourself as being part of a larger country, and that you're part of a larger whole. Mm-hmm. And that is a very expansive quality that just really aids one's own consciousness.
And yet so often the democratic process is thought of as each person weighing in with their preference, their vote, and then all the votes are tallied up and somehow a winner is selected. That's probably the poorest example of democracy in a spiritual sense. The larger driving value ought to be concerned with what's best for the whole. What candidate, what measures, what laws would best serve the greatest good of the largest number. If we thought in those terms more in making democratic decisions, then we would be acting as the soul and with a sense of responsibility. Because like you say, it is the awareness of a larger whole in which one exists. It's a sense of the group. Responsibility is really based on group obligation.
Right, because as it says in the opening statement, the sense of responsibility is indication of the awakening of the soul, and that soul is, by its own nature, group conscious. So it kind of brings that type of consciousness with it. It forces us to adhere to this influence of this greater sense of consciousness, and so it is working in sync with the soul itself.
There are very interesting spiritual issues connected with responsibility. One of them has to do with the difference between individual responsibility, group responsibility, collective responsibility. An example might be the continuing dialogue in regard to Germany and the Holocaust, and how much responsibility is borne by the nation as a whole and by generations of people that weren't even alive at the time the Holocaust occurred. There's an interesting example in this country over race relations in the recent speech by Barack Obama, which has generated a lot of discussion. I think it's very productive, because it's the question is, who is responsible and how do we work out the problem? Responsibility doesn't mean the assigning of blame necessarily, but it does mean saying, what can I do to make it better? What part can I play in a healing of the problem? I'm a citizen, I'm a part of a larger group. What can I do to contribute to better relationships, more harmony? That's part of responsibility.
Right, and this sense of responsibility begins in the family unit, because that's where really, one is responsible for one's children, for one's family, and for the upbringing of the children, and the responsibility to fitting in with the community. And so this is where the sense of responsibility